Good afternoon, everyone. I am Susan Abrams, CEO at Illinois Holocaust Museum, and on behalf of our board of directors, our staff, and our volunteers, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. The short version of our museum's mission statement is Remember the past, transform the future. And today's special program is about two outstanding women, Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who used the law to change our world for the better. What could be more fitting today than to have two remarkable trailblazing women themselves to share their insights and help us learn more about these two Supreme Court justices? While they'll be introduced in a moment, let me offer my thanks to both author Linda Hirshman and Judge Anclair Williams for joining us to share their insights and create this special program. Many of you on the Zoom likely know that this program is offered in conjunction with the museum's exhibition, Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which you can either visit in person with many safety protocols in place or online through our wonderful public virtual tours a couple times a week. And while we will continue to tell RBG's story at the museum through January 3rd, we will always be inspired by her and will work to build on her legacy in the ongoing fight for human rights. Before we begin the program, I have just a couple of announcements. A very special thank you to our community partners listed on our introductory slides for their continued support. And two, our panelists will take questions at the end of the presentation. Please ask your questions by typing them into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. They will answer as many questions as possible, but may not get to all of them. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Gray, a member of the museum's executive committee of our board of directors and a leading partner himself at Jones Day Law Firm. Michael brought Judge Williams to the program, and for that, we are so appreciative, Michael. Michael and his family also contribute considerable time and resources to our museum, and we're so fortunate that his wife, Juliet, is president of our women's board. It's been a family affair. We've even had an intern from the family. I should note that Jones Day, too, is a longtime supporter of our museum. And now, Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Susan. It means so much for me to be here today and to make these introductions to two extraordinary women in Judge Anclair Williams and Linda Hirshman. I could not imagine a better opportunity at this particular time to introduce you all to these two fabulous people to talk about two of our nation's heroes in Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A little bit about Linda and Judge Williams before we get started, and then we will let them tell the story of these two trailblazing women that Linda put forward in her spectacular book, Sisters-in-Law. I suggest everybody try to get a copy. No, Linda did not pay me to put in that plug, but it is a fabulous book showing how these two extraordinary women from extraordinarily different backgrounds really advanced the interests of all of our citizens in this country and were just spectacular in their own rights, and the timing could not be more important. The book was a bestseller from both the Washington Post as well as the New York Times, was also the NPR Pick of the Year. Linda has been a trailblazer, as Susan said, in her own right. After graduating law school at University of Chicago, she got her philosophy degree from University of Illinois Chicago, taught philosophy, was a practicing labor lawyer for a prestigious union side firm, and had the great fortune to bring 3 separate cases to the US Supreme Court, including the landmark case Garcia versus San Antonio Metropolitan. So she comes from this experience, with a deep experience in the law, and has written this extraordinary story. She wrote it some 5 years ago, but it is timely today as it has ever been. She is in the final stages of another fabulous book on William Lloyd Harrison and Frederick Douglass and the abolitionist movement. And I know I speak for all of our community in our hopes to see that book soon. Our other extraordinary panelist is Judge Anclair Williams, who is one of the, I think, extraordinary, not just women, but judge in our country's history. She was first nominated to the bench in the Northern District of Illinois by President Reagan. She was a trailblazer as a woman of color in the Northern District of Illinois. I had the extraordinary pleasure of appearing before her back in 1997, and she treated me as a fifth-year associate in a law firm with extraordinary respect, and I learned a lot just from those experiences. And to be able to continue that relationship with her today has been a real honor for me. She then was nominated by President Clinton to be on the Seventh Circuit and was there for almost 20 years until retiring. She's retired and has joined my law firm, Jones Day, in leading an effort to promote the rule of law throughout all of Africa. And Judge Williams, both before her time, when she retired from the bench and after, has been a tireless advocate for the rule of law, traveling to most of the African countries, meeting with their judiciary, with their governments, and trying to expand and have a just legal system in all of that. And we are just incredibly fortunate to be a part of it. But without further ado, I give you Judge Anclair Williams and Linda Hirshman, and am as excited as you are to listen to this story of Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that kind introduction. It is an honor and privilege to be part of this conversation about the iconic Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women who indeed changed the world, were role models for me during my career and for so many women, and actually role models for all of us. I'm fortunate and was blessed to be friends with both of them. And so it's really special to chat with you this afternoon with the brilliant and amazing author, Linda Hirshman, who I've known for many years. So welcome and good afternoon, Linda.
Thank you so much for doing this with me. It's an honor to appear in front of you, Your Honor.
And let's get right to it, Linda. First of all, this was not the book that you started out to write. What was your plan and how did it evolve?
I'm interested in how people act together to make social change. So I was kind of looking around for an example of my theory that people have to act collectively in order to make change in the world. And I was having lunch with my agent, actually, and he said to me, you know, it's too bad there aren't two people on the Supreme Court that are an example of your thinking. And I was like, wait a minute, there actually are. So we wrote the proposal on a napkin.
And did you have an opportunity to interview either justice for the book or get permission from them to write the book?
So I rattled my network, and I organized to meet Justice Ginsburg again. I had known her when she was a young professor and just working on her first casebook on women in the law. So I went down to Washington to meet with her, and she said, after hearing about my project, that she would cooperate with me if Justice O'Connor said it was okay. So I got this is actually a great story. So I'm sitting at my desk one day and my cell phone rings, and I picked it up and a voice on the other end said, "Hello, Linda, this is Sandra O'Connor." And I said, "Oh, it's my sister playing a joke on me." It was. I mean, it's just not every day that your phone rings, and maybe your phone rings in those.
No.
So she, and it's very typical of her, she called me personally to tell me that she would not cooperate with me. She did not do it in a cowardly letter or anything. She went right there. So I thought oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do my book. If they won't cooperate with me, nobody will cooperate with me. But you know, I'm impossible. So I started calling up the clerks and people who knew Ginsburg first. And to my astonishment, they were willing to talk to me. They were positively chatty Cathy willing to talk to me. And I couldn't figure it out. So, but I mean, right, you don't like ask, right? Say, I thought you weren't supposed to talk to me. No. So I went to the New York Historical Society to hear Justice Ginsburg give a presentation. I was in the middle of the book. And afterward, we were standing in the lobby where people gather to get their books signed and stuff, you know, afterward. And a whole bunch of the people that I had interviewed recognized me, and they came up to me in the lobby and said, oh, you're the one who's called me and are writing the book about Ruth. And finally, one of them looked at me and she said, you know, she said it was okay, don't you? We would never have talked to you if she hadn't told us it was okay.
So, and so then you were off to the races and continued. And this
I was in.
And then that's what you do. I mean, that's part of why you're brilliant. That's part of why we can rely on what you say, because of all that effort you put in before you turn in that final galley. Your book begins weaving the story of their lives together, and it starts at the beginning with their childhoods. How did their early experiences shape their lives and careers?
You know, it's so strange because they couldn't have grown up in more different places. One of them grew up in deepest Brooklyn, New York, and one of them grew up in a remote ranch in Southeast Arizona. And yet they had something in common, which was they were effectively only children. For the first, Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a sister, but she died when Ruth was 3. And so she was effectively an only child her whole life. And Sandra Day O'Connor was 12 when her next sibling was born. So she was effectively an only child in these critical early years. And O'Connor was the apple of her father's eye, and Ginsburg was the apple of her mother's eye. And I believe, insofar as you can ever answer this question, that being like, they were like members of adult society from the beginning, and they shared that. And I think that makes a huge difference. The culture of the West, which O'Connor grew up in, also makes you very independent. So there's a very much of a keep your own counsel, keep your own company kind of culture on a ranch like that. Brooklyn's not like that.
Yeah. And of course, Justice Ginsburg lost her mom right before she graduated. I mean, she was there and skipped her graduation, and it was her mother who she speaks about living for to make sure her mother would be proud. So they were both raised as strong, independent young women, taught to achieve, taught there was really no limits on what they could do.
It's a real immigrant story because Ruth's mother had a brother, and the family found enough money to send him to college, but they couldn't send Celia Bader to college. And so Ruth always felt the inequality of that and an obligation to fulfill her mother's dreams.
And well, she did. Now they both fulfilled dreams of their parents. But there were a lot of roadblocks along the way, even though they both had extraordinary academic records. But law firms telling them they didn't hire women. Ruth, she was a woman and Jewish and had a child. Justices and judges who refused to hire them as law clerks. Ruth only got her clerkship because one of her professors, who was a feeder to the judge she ultimately worked for, said, if you don't hire her, I'm never sending you another clerk. And if she doesn't work out, I've got a man to take her place. They had to deal with sexism their entire careers. What kept them going? And when we look at today, there's been progress. 50% of the women are law graduates from law school, but women are still lagging behind in law firm partnerships, in corporations, as leaders. What lessons can we take away from them on how to deal with both explicit and implicit bias?
I think there are two most important things. One is they never got the memo that they were inferior. They just never got the memo. I think being the apple of your parents' eye sets you up so that it's harder to convince you that you're inferior. But we know from the things they said, each of them said, that they were sure they could do the job if they were given the opportunity. O'Connor said explicitly that all she had to do was get in the door and she would succeed. And Ginsburg, after she was appointed to the Supreme Court, no, she was appointed to the DC Circuit.
Yeah.
And one of her colleagues at Columbia was appointed to a very high-ranking job in Washington. She gave a party for the new colleague when she came to Washington. And Harriet Rabb, the colleague, said to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, "Ruth, do you believe the two of us in such high-ranking positions?" And Justice Ginsburg looked at her colleague and said, "Of course I believe it. Why wouldn't I believe it?" I think the other thing that's really important for us to take from my story of the two of them is that they never felt like they were the only ones who belonged in high places. They never wanted to pull the ladder up after them. Famously, O'Connor said she was nervous when she was nominated to the Supreme Court because it was okay to be the first, but she did not want to be the last. So I think faith in yourself and faith in your sisters would be the two most important lessons.
Well, they learned that lesson. There were hands, as tough as it was for them. They had the confidence of their parents, but there were also those who believed in them, and there were hands that reached out to them that helped them in their career. And they always acknowledged that. And I think they felt that responsibility to pass it on. Justice O'Connor, backing back a minute before we get to the Supreme Court, had a different route. You mentioned she was the cowgirl. She was an active member of the Republican Party, an elected official, actually first woman majority leader. And Justice Ginsburg co-founded the Women's Rights Project at ACLU, a liberal through and through. They were the same, and yet there were differences. Those experiences colored their approach.
They absolutely did. I think that Justice O'Connor's years in the legislature, and also as a trial judge, which Ginsburg never was, made her sensitive to the facts of the matter. She was always very attentive to exactly who was in front of her and what were the facts of the case, and giving an opinion that would resolve it, but would go no further, lest the next case that came along would be, importantly different. So she was very clear on that. And she also had a wonderful emotional quotient. She was very smart about other people and exactly where the political landscape lay. So she brought those skills. Ruth Bader Ginsburg brought a capacity for theory. She had a clear jurisprudence. You called her a liberal. She had a clear liberal jurisprudence that was a great strength of her in her career.
And going back to Justice O'Connor for a minute, that ability to engage and because she had to deal with the legislature and she had to deal with trial, those were skills that she used on the court. Those skills of getting her brethren, because she was there alone for so long, to what I would say, go to the party with her.
When she arrived, she established the justices always having lunch together. on the day of an argument. This is a classic O'Connor move. It's sensitive to the other people's need for society, and it also uses food as a binder. And
And
all
then,
of
sorry, go
no,
ahead. No, I was going to say, and then Justice Ginsburg started the musicals because, you know, she just loved music. And so she brought people together, and it was her strategy, her thinking that was so crucial to the court and to the other members of the court because they knew she was a force to be reckoned with.
she was certainly a force to be reckoned with. I think that I relate very much to her because I also love music. And so I find that such an engaging piece of information. People can, and you notice that food and music are not words. They're not things that you argue about. They're things that bring you together.
And both of them shared something else. To me, an appreciation for humanity. You've mentioned that. And Justice O'Connor, right from the beginning, was very outgoing. I had the chance to travel with her a couple times with a Canadian delegation. We were in Williamsburg, and later we went to Canada. And neither of us had husbands, so we spent time sitting together on the bus, going from place to place when we weren't on flights. And she wanted us to sing on the bus. And so here we were, all these judges, up to the Chief Justice of Canada, Courts of Appeals judges from the US, and we were singing on the bus. And she had not a great voice, but she loved to sing. And everywhere we went, people ran up to her. We were in Williamsburg. She stopped, she smiled, she chatted, she took photos. We could barely complete our tour. She was genuinely engaged. Justice Ginsburg, on the other hand, was much quieter, much shyer. And in those early years, for me, at least when I met her, it was hard to make a conversation. Our friendship really developed with a letter. I was president of the Federal Judges Association, and I had the privilege of introducing President Bush at the White House. And she wrote me the most personal, wonderful note, basically saying she was proud of me and how I had presented myself. And that began a strong and lasting friendship. She was known, in fact, both of them were known for their lifelong, deep friendships because who they were never really changed. Is that your view, Linda?
That is my view. I think that who they were never really changed. That's really insightful and important. And I was privileged to have access to previously unseen letters, a big collection, hundreds of letters that Justice Ginsburg wrote to her favorite client, Stephen Wiesenfeld. And you can see her quiet humanity reaching out to him and his family in those letters, just like you just related. I didn't know that story until this minute, but it's a perfect example. Ruth Bader Ginsburg offered people what she was good at. She was good at words. She loved music. She would quote poetry in the letters, or she would put little tiny sketches of beautiful things, butterflies and stuff on them when her client had sickness or hard times. She used that mode of communication, and that was her way of reaching out. O'Connor was much more charismatic in person.
And then Justice Ginsburg, her favorite client, she actually, when he remarried, she attended the wedding, and his son, she married him. Now she too blossomed though. She blossomed because when this whole Notorious RBG came out, once she found out who Notorious was, BIG, she embraced it. She said, hey, we're both from Brooklyn. I feel him. And she blossomed. And I had the privilege of doing about 5 conversations with her, from Rome with law student to Notre Dame with 7,000 people. And when we told her we needed to lift the $5,000 limit, she said, well, I'm not a rock star. I said, au contraire, you are a rock star. You are a rock star. And both of them, though, recognized how important it was to be open and available. Why do you think that was so important? And how much did that have to do with why they were so widely admired?
They both knew that they were icons. I think it came naturally to Justice O'Connor, actually. When after she hung out her shingle and tried to make a living in the law in Phoenix, she became very active in Republican politics. She was the co-chair of the committee in Paradise Valley where she lived. You don't go into politics if you're not interested in people, and mostly, for the most part, sincerely interested in people and very good with people. She was the head of the Phoenix Junior League, which is actually a big deal in Phoenix. So that's another people position. I think it came naturally to her, but I think in both cases, they understood the symbolism of their role, O'Connor being first and Ginsburg being a very close second. She used to say she thought there was more than one O'Connor because people kept asking her to do stuff and saying that O'Connor had done it. And if O'Connor had done everything that they said O'Connor had done, there had to be two of her. So she was very actively involved. And Ginsburg felt the torch. She felt that she had received the torch. And also she had a huge role in the public eye when she was at the ACLU. But that wasn't just litigating. She was the living representation of women in the law for 10 years. So, and I think they were both clear. If you're going to be an icon, you have got to be able to have relationships with people.
And sustain those relationships over time. And they took comfort in the friendships because they were both under tremendous pressure. And the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's habits, you know, she was known for getting 3 or 4 hours sleep. She went over opinions over and over. I mean, both of them so wanted to give the best product they possibly could and got the most out of their clerks. And they had what I think you called an affectionate alliance, a deep, special friendship. How did each one's work and presence affect the other?
Oh, that's so interesting. So O'Connor said she didn't want to be the last. And you could see how she would feel quite invested in who came next. And and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the second woman on the Supreme Court, was appointed by a Democratic president. And as you say, comes from a very different philosophical background than Justice O'Connor did. O'Connor writes spontaneously to Barry Goldwater, not exactly known for his liberal proclivities. She writes to Goldwater. She was always writing to Goldwater. She writes to Goldwater after Ginsburg came on the court, a letter about unrelated matters. And at the bottom, she puts, P.S. Justice Ginsburg is a quite effective and wonderful new justice. Just spontaneously telling this lion of the right that the new liberal from the ACLU was doing a great job. And you know that O'Connor took so much pleasure in that. When Ginsburg was suggested, the Supreme Court put up no fuss against it whatsoever. O'Connor had done such a fantastic job making her place in that all-male institution. She did exactly what she said she would do, that when the opportunity to welcome another woman came along, it was not a subject for discussion again. Now, Ginsburg says that O'Connor was like a great big sister to her. And since they vote in conference in order of seniority, the Chief Justice first and then the justices in order of seniority, O'Connor always spoke before Ginsburg did. And Ginsburg felt, she didn't use this phrase, but I'll use it, that O'Connor was her offensive line and she was holding the quarterback behind O'Connor. When O'Connor retired, she missed that offensive line, something terrible.
Yeah, it was that trip that we took. Well, Williamsburg was right after Justice O'Connor stepped down, and both of them, I think, missed it. I think Justice O'Connor, it was very difficult for her once she stepped down. She became active in iCivics and started that amazing program to educate kids about the branches of government and specifically about the judiciary as well. That program is now spread to more than 5 million students across America, teaching the basics of democracy and civics. And so that became her mission. But I think it was a very difficult time for both of them. And Justice Ginsburg was there so long alone.
Yes, and she was 5 years, and she was so happy when Justice Sotomayor came. And so, they don't complain much about what it was like to be alone with the guys, although there are a couple of instances where the male justices acted out in oral argument, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg took them to task for what they were saying, particularly in cases involving girls. She was very sensitive to the way issues of girls' rights were treated with respect. So if you spend 5 years with them, as I did, you get glimpses of it, but you do see it clearly in how much they meant to each other.
And and Justice Ginsburg became, of course, the great dissenter and wore her collars whenever she dissented. I mean, she did the physical manifestation of reflecting those dissents, and so became more outspoken in those later years.
Oh, much more outspoken. And she fell into the habit of reading her dissents aloud from the bench, which most justices do not do. This is a very rare thing. And it's an act of performance art. And if you follow it, after O'Connor left and Justice Kennedy started writing these very, shall we say, unsympathetic opinions about women's rights, Ginsburg did it more forcefully and more often. And then she turned the volume up until her great dissent in Shelby County versus Holder, the voting rights case, in which she said you don't throw your umbrella away because it was keeping you dry during a rainstorm. So she was an opera goer. I think this is something that is underreported about Justice Ginsburg. And she understood the value of a well-presented aria, complete with the costume.
Yeah, yeah. There were other lessons. We've talked about some of the lessons that Justice O'Connor shared with her, because she was the big sister who helped nurture her, who showed her the ropes, who helped her. But they also shared difficulties and challenges like cancer. In fact, when Justice Ginsburg was first diagnosed with colon cancer in '99, it was Justice O'Connor who told her to schedule the chemo appointments on Fridays so she would have the weekend to recover before those Mondays. They both lost their husbands, and Justice O'Connor, Alzheimer's was, as we all know, a terrible disease. And part of why she left was to try to help him in those later years. And then Justice Ginsburg's husband passed. And he was, as with both of them, they were the rocks. They were the rocks. What can we learn from their determination and their grit and going forward?
I think the cancer story is really perfect, because Justice O'Connor did two things from her experience as a breast cancer patient. One was she figured, this is so classic. What did she do? She didn't go to Ginsburg and say, oh, here it's going to be emotionally so hard on you to have cancer, and here's the way you lean on your friends and stuff, even though she did lean on her friends. She went to Ginsburg and said, here is some very practical advice about how you can keep working at the jobs that give us meaning. My favorite review of Sisters-in-Law was in the Washington Post, when the reviewer said it was such a nice change to read a book about women that told us about their public lives. And O'Connor gave Ruth the best advice she could think of for how Ginsburg could keep leading her public life. The other thing that I honor Justice O'Connor for so much is that she went public in a very long and graphic speech about her breast cancer, which was on C-SPAN. And it wasn't so common in those years for women to talk about their breast cancer. And she, the most courageous and stiff upper lip person I ever wrote about, shared how she had suffered with it and gave other women room to have that experience and gave them sympathy. So her performance in that circumstance was perfect.
And you touched on something that I think they shared in common too. They were not afraid to be women.
Right.
Celebrate, I mean, in their families, with their husbands. And like O'Connor started the exercise classes at the court. at the highest court, that is the gym at the top of the Supreme Court. Ginsburg was doing her 20 push-ups. I mean, they both, another piece of advice they gave, because they were always giving advice when I traveled with O'Connor, she's like, Ann, make sure you have a black top and a black skirt and black pants, and you can just put a jacket over it. You're ready for everything. You only need one suitcase, not two, like you carry. Ginsburg, similarly, you know, they celebrated in those just gorgeous outfits she wore. I mean, they it seemed to me showed that you could be a woman, an intellectual, brilliant, and a leader and not forget who you were.
They had a lot of joy in life. And one of the joyful things in life is the material world of good food. And if you love to eat often, you care about cooking, which O'Connor did, and good, beautiful clothing. They were very, they were very rich in their enjoyment of life. And a part of it is, and the music, is the things that, one of the things that Ruth said early on was that she didn't want people to be locked into sex role stereotype behavior. So she could both not cook, Marty could cook, she could love to shop for gorgeous clothes wherever she traveled. I'm told she was always looking for those jackets. And you may notice that the shoes were Ferragamo to the end. So you didn't have to be any stereotype thing. You could partake of the pleasures of life without rigidly limiting yourself by sex.
Right, right. And so I have on a jacket today in honor of both of them because they also loved color. You mentioned, you know, Marty, who was so critical, and Justice O'Connor's husband, so critical to how they were able to achieve what they did. Perhaps you can share with us the role Marty played. You've already talked about him being the top chef, because at some point when Jane was about 11, because Ruth only knew how to cook 7 meals and she rotated those meals. So Marty cooked on the weekend. And at some point when Jane was about 11, she came to her and said, you know what, Marty, Daddy should just do all the cooking because you're not the one. But they managed to have strong home lives, kids, grandkids, and successful careers. So what do you have to say about that, Linda, and what we can learn from that?
I think they lived in a time where there was less inequality, so that life was more forgiving. And O'Connor could take 5 years off, as she did when her nanny quit. And she looked after her sons, and she also became the president of the Junior League. And being O'Connor, she was practically running the city of Phoenix while not holding a paid job. But the world was a more forgiving place then, I think. And we need to think about the social conditions that enable women and men to have a little more wiggle room and try on different aspects of life. I think that's a hugely important thing to having, like someone once said, husband, children, work, pick best 2 out of 3. Nobody really wants to do that. You want to have all 3. And in order to do that, the world needs to be a little more forgiving, and it was more forgiving before there was such radical inequality and such a speed up in the profession. So I want to say that. I've been thinking a lot about whether their personal characteristics advanced them or it was the social times, and it's obviously both. But I wish that the world were a little more forgiving.
Yeah, and they, you know, Justice Ginsburg once said, you can't have it all at the same time. And as you look at your life, you know, she said choosing a great partner was huge in her life because Marty did so much to help her in her aspirations and actually getting on the DC circuit as well as the Supreme Court. But there were times where she backed off, he was more in front. And do you think, Linda, when we look at our circumstances here now, just speaking in terms of COVID-19, do you think that's going to have an impact now that so many people are working from home, and there have been articles about women and some fear that women will be more stereotyped, it will be more difficult for women to achieve?
Yes, because women are working the second shift. They were always working the second shift. working hard at work to get ahead, and bearing a disproportionate amount of the housework and child rearing. That's just statistical fact. So that was the pre-existing condition, shall we say. And then the COVID came along and locked them in their households where there's nothing that liberates women like a good public school system. So they were then completely responsible for the children, and whatever inequality in there, if they had a partner in there, and if they had a heterosexual partner with traditional habits, whatever the inequality in their family, it's ameliorated by the schools and the hired help and stuff. You're fully bearing it. So the COVID landed like a terrible infection. That wasn't a hard metaphor. On top of the pre-existing condition that most heterosexual families are unequal anyway. So it has been terrible for the women. I actually wrote a book about it. You can buy it for 99 cents at Amazon. It's called Get to Work. And it's about how the decisions that lead you to that unequal place really rob you of your ability to get to work. And work meant the world to the justices, just to circle back. And in each case, particularly in Marty's case, his deep commitment to an egalitarian marriage enabled her to get to work.
Yeah, she actually said that Marty was the only boy she dated who thought she had a brain.
This is true, but Nina Totenberg said something so funny when I shared that with her. She said, Linda, she was 17 when she met Marty.
That's true. And she hadn't dated a lot. That is true. That's very true. Let's talk, before we wind up and talk about their legacies, the rise of 5-4 decisions was really beginning, some in O'Connor's time, but more so in Ruth Ginsburg's time, in some of the most critical social issues of our time: immigration, race discrimination, abortion, you name it, housing, fair housing, voting, all those kinds of things. How did both of them deal with sort of knowing that you had to get up every day and deal with your colleagues? How were they able to handle that?
They were both very careful. They were very careful women. I actually look forward to the day when women can be a little more careless and a little more open about their anger and the cost that we bear in being treated unjustly. But they were extremely disciplined. Sandra Day O'Connor never wrote angry footnotes, taking down her colleagues for their stupidity, the way both conservative Justice Scalia and liberal Justice Brennan did. William Brennan wrote an opinion about O'Connor early in her tenure, criticizing her personally. He said it was the biggest mistake he ever made. She never made that mistake, and neither did Ginsburg. Ginsburg has actually written in the academic literature about how you should stay away from getting personal with your colleagues. Now, I will say that after O'Connor left, when Kennedy was the swing justice, and Ginsburg found herself increasingly in dissent, the critical rhetoric in her dissents did start to ramp up. I think she was desperate that her vision of America, which she had very clearly, was eroding away, and she could see it drifting away. And I think she was also very aware of the fact that she didn't have an unlimited amount of time left. So her rhetoric ramped up, but for most of their tenure, they were extremely careful. One of my sources said to me, she could say the most outrageous things in that little tiny voice.
That's true. That's true. At the memorial for Justice Ginsburg at the Capitol, the American mezzo-soprano Denise Graves, one of her favorite opera singers, sang American Anthem. And those lyrics say, "All we've been given by those who came before, the dream of a nation where freedom would endure, The work and prayers for centuries have brought us to this day. What will be our legacy? What will our children say? So I put that question, those two questions to you. What is their legacy? And what will our children say about them?
Justice O'Connor's legacy is that she is iconic. She was a great first. She did not come to the court with a well worked out jurisprudence, and I don't think she's going to leave us with a jurisprudential legacy. There was a reason why she was the critical fifth vote. She had an unerring sense of where the American people were, and for a time, she held it together on the court. But her real legacy is that she was such a great first. And by being so good at being the first woman, she paved the way for all of the rest of us. We all swim in her stream. I think that Justice Ginsburg's legacy, this is a question I've been asked a lot in these last sad days, is from her years at the ACLU. She, from 1970 to 1980, people don't realize this. The 14th Amendment had never applied to women. It had been held not to apply to women 9 years before she started trying to flip the court, and she flipped the court. I was just starting to practice law in 1971 when she won Reed v. Reed. I was 2 years out of law school and feeling very beleaguered, and the news of that decision meant the world to me. And then she built on it until when she left the ACLU in 1980, she had the Supreme Court tied up in knots, applying the 14th Amendment to women, whether they liked it or not.
Right, Social Security benefits, housing. I mean, it was just so many things that we would not have today, that she, inheritance of land, so many cases that influenced who we are today. And so that legacy will live on. That legacy will live on. And I think with Justice O'Connor, I'm so happy this book was written, and there have been many, many books written about her. But you know, social media wasn't what it is today. And so with Justice Ginsburg, I mean, to me, they were both rock stars in their own way. They both blazed trail. And I know you, what do you think of this comment? Justice Ginsburg said, people were always asking, when would there be enough women? And she said, when there are 9. Yes.
When there are 9, yes, when there are 9. She was clear from the beginning.
Nobody ever worried about when there were 9 men. And I think in that song, and to me, that idea of never letting the robe get in the way of their humanity, in the little and big ways that they lived their lives. They were just as kind to the bellmen and whoever they ran to on the street as they were to presidents, in terms of being gracious and understanding that ability to put themselves in the shoes of others. So it was just remarkable. That song continues, let them say of me, I was the one who believed in sharing the blessings I received. Let me know in my heart when my days are through, America, America, I gave my best to you. And we can certainly agree they gave their best and more than their best.
That's perfect. That is perfect and perfectly true.
So Michael, I know that there's some questions that have been coming in, and thank you so much, Linda, and I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Thanks, Judge. You're a tough act to follow on the passing on the questions. But what I'm going to try to do is, we have so many questions from all over the country, try to break them down and have some short ones and some long ones. First one to you, Your Honor. You had mentioned that in one of your last times with Justice Ginsburg, you're in Rome talking about her being a rock star, and both you and Linda mentioned that in your comments. Do you even think, did she ever get to a point where she understood that was her position, and especially in those final days in these last few years with the movies and the incredible our museum has this extraordinary, notorious RBG, but did she ever really come to grips with that?
Oh, I think she did, because she said, I can't believe people want to know about this 80-year-old woman. They want to know about my life. I mean, I think she definitely recognized it, and I think she enjoyed it. I think she enjoyed it. I think she relished it. And then the conversations I had with her, you always had time limits, and you don't think about her being a chatty Cathy. But when she had a photogenic, it seems to me, memory. The details that she could recall from every case she tried at the ACLU, from the cases that she did at the Supreme Court, it was difficult to keep us within that time frame, because she wanted to share. And I also think she knew it was important to share. I think it was important for her to let the world see, to let Americans see that she was the very same Ruth Ginsburg, to open up her heart, to let people see what is it that has made this woman. She didn't envision when she was growing up that she would have that gavel and she would be the second woman on the Supreme Court. So I think she did. I think she embraced it, and she had fun when the actors would come to chambers and all the clerks would get to meet the actors. I mean, I think she, don't you think, Linda? She got seriously into it, and all the different, and the t-shirts and everything. I mean, I think she, and then, and look at what she did with her exercise instructor. Right. She's all in there. She wrote a note about the impact that it had. Oh yeah, I think she really loved being RBG.
Linda, a question for you, really building off Judge Ann's comments. As she then, as Justice Ginsburg, and even to an extent Justice O'Connor, understood their roles in history, what do you think you learned? What would be their lessons for young women? We happen to have a bunch of young women today listening to both of you talk about these two icons and their heroic work, as well as yours, Linda, and Judge Williams. What do you think would be the lessons from Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor to young women, possibly, in today's society, possibly going into the law, but trying to make a difference?
I think she was always interested in young women. I mean, one of the things she loved about being a rock star is that when, like, legal journalists, I know the other journalists, right? And they would come to interview her with their assistants who were like 20. And Justice Ginsburg was much more interested in talking to the assistant than she was in talking to the journalist. She clearly saw that notorious business gave her access to the next generation of women, and it meant the world to her. So I think she would want to pass on that you should never read the memo that says that you're inferior. I think that she would want to pass on that you take note when someone tries to make you inferior, and you push back if you can, and if you can't, you wait until you can. So I think that she would portray a very assertive, she would, what my friend said, she not only had that little tiny voice, but she would say the most radical things in that little tiny voice. And she could get away with it. And what I know the women that did the notorious Tumblr page, and she said to me, what did they love about Ruth Bader Ginsburg? So old and still so radical. That.
Yeah, so cool. So cool. The other thing I think they would both say is dream big, because they have big dreams. All those roadblocks were in the way for them, and they were like number one, and they were just killing it, and they dreamed big, and they were able to achieve those dreams. Because see, if you don't dream big, if you dream small, you're going to have small achievements. You got to dream big too. They never gave up, no matter how hard the journey, no matter how many doors closed. They just kept trying to find a way. Like Justice O'Connor worked for free. Yeah. Ruth Bader Ginsburg couldn't get to a law firm. She clerked for a judge, and she went to Sweden, left her baby. I mean, they never gave up. They stood up. So you have to find the time when you have to stand up. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg brought lawsuits at Rutgers and Columbia for the law professors when she realized their pay was less, the women. And then she also took into account maids and other workers, and she changed that culture. They stood up for themselves, because the other thing is, if you don't stand up for yourself, who's going to stand up for you? So they were strategic, like Linda said. They weren't screaming and hollering and burning anything down to get what they wanted, but they were very strategic and methodical, analyzed the situation and came up with a plan, and then they gave back, as Linda said.
Judge, I'm going to put you on the spot because you are a hero in your own right. How would you build on it? What would be your message to those same young women as they're entering society, based, from going from your childhood in Detroit to what you were able to achieve?
Well, I would say all those things that I think Ruth would say. And then I would say, remember your ancestors. Remember the history. From the women's standpoint, remember how many women fought and struggled so we would have the right to vote, so we could achieve what we're achieving. As a Black person, I go back to my ancestors all the time. I look at what my parents had to go through, and I know that they went through it so I could be the best that I could be. And I think when you want to give up, whether your people were picking potatoes in Ireland and made their way here, or they were victims of the Holocaust, or they came like my people, enslaved. They came to this country and they had dreams and they worked hard so we can be where we can be. And so whenever I want to give up, I think about my parents not being able to get jobs because they were Black and they both had college degrees. And so I know that if I give up, I'm giving up on them. It's a slap in the face for what they did. And I think everyone has that story, whether enslaved people or people who've come here as immigrants, the people who sacrificed so we could all be where we are. So we could be where we are, and you can't give up on them. So in your desperate hours, when you think you can't go forward, I think you have to think about that. And I think you have to read about people who have achieved to get inspiration.
Linda, you brought us here today. Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
I think it's really important to know how joyous they were in their work and how much their work nourished them and rewarded them. Work can be really wonderful, even if there are tremendous obstacles that keep you from getting what you desire. You're using your capacities. And after Marty Ginsburg died, someone asked Ruth, her client, Stephen Wiesenfeld, asked Ruth how she had gotten through the first year. And she wrote and said, I got through this terrible year because of the great job that Marty helped me get. And I want to share with the young women who are on this program that there are moments, a lot of moments, when your work is a source of great joy to you. So it's both overcoming obstacles and also really being nourished by the positive things.
Well, I'm going to turn this back over to Wendy for some closing remarks, but let me personally say what a honor it was to be here and listen to you two ladies tell these stories. Everything that you were talking about is really everything that the museum stands for, in terms of taking a stand and understanding and remembering the past, but transforming the future. So Wendy, do you want to close us off?
Yes, thank you guys. How did we get so lucky to spend the last hour with you? It has been such a joy and honor. For those of you who are watching, and we will let you, we are recording this program. Many people had asked, and you will be able to find that in our thank you note that we send out, and we will post it on our YouTube channel in a few days. In the chat, you will see a link to all of our incredible upcoming programming. I wanted to call out something, though, very special that is just around the corner that has been a year and a half in the making. We are having a special symposium on the Nuremberg trials, titled A Warning from History, The Nuremberg Trials, 75 Years Later. This is an incredible 2-day symposium with plenaries, opening and closing keynote addresses, and I'll let you go to the link to explore that, culminating with our Kristallnacht commemoration on Monday evening, November 9th. And for all the attorneys in the audience, 4.50 Illinois professional responsibility credits are available. And finally, if you could take a moment and fill out the survey that is also in the chat, we would be so grateful. We want to make sure that we're on the mark, providing you programming that is meaningful to you, and also report back to our generous funders. And with that, we thank you for coming. We hope to see you soon, and have a wonderful afternoon.